Hello, my name is Marc Sommerfeld. Today we're going to use our shaker set over here to show you how we're going to build 3 different shaker doors. One of them is going to have a flat panel on it, the other one's going to have a flat panel with hardwood, and the other one is going to have a hardwood raised panel. So we're going to show you how to build these 3 different doors. Okay, to arrive at the dimensions, to cut out your stiles and your rails, the stiles are these uprights and the rails are here. To arrive at the dimensions, I'll show you how we're going to do that. This door is going to be 12 inches wide and 20 inches long. Okay, the engagement on this set is 7/16 of an inch. By engagement, I mean the tongue of that cope goes into the pattern cut, into that groove, 7/16 of an inch. The 2 pieces engage into each other 7/16 of an inch. So we're going to make all of our stiles and rails 2 7/16. And the reason why is because when those are put together, you're going to lose 7/16 and lose 7/16 when they come together. So what's that leave you? It leaves you with 2 inches and 2 inches, which is 4. Well, that happens to be our magic number when we're building doors. So if my door is 12 inches wide, all I got to do is subtract 4, and I know my rail here is 8 inches. A lot of guys use a computer cut list to figure their sizes of their doors, but if you use this method, you can do it in your head very easily. Up and down, this piece is 2 7/16, correct? But if it's 20 inches long, you just make it 20 inches, just like that. Okay, so that's how we arrive at the sizes of our stiles and rails. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is cut the copes on the ends of our rails. To do that, we're going to use the cope cutter in our set right here. And the cope cutter is the cutter that has the bearing in the middle. Okay? So we're going to lock in our cope cutter. Put our insert ring on. Now the next thing we have to do is we have to get this cope cutter set to the correct height to start with. To do that, we have this new little tool here called the Easy Set. Here's how it works. You take it and turn the middle section counterclockwise till you hit the star, and then you start. Well, the thickness of this wood is 13/16. So all we do, the thickness of this wood is 3/4. We usually work with 13/16, but we're going to dial it down to 3/4 right here. So we just go from here to 3/4, okay? Now, we find out the cope cutter, which is, we got 8 different bits. Right here is the cope cutter. And you can see that cope cutter is not the cope cutter for this set, it's the cope cutter that has an ogee on the bottom. But this cope cutter will work with any of the bits, any cope cutter. So all we have to do is take that slot cutter and set it right down on top of that edge, right like this. Okay, and I'm just going to unlock that, and we're just going to tweak that down. So that top slot cutter is setting right on the edge, right there. Okay, now what we're going to do is lock that in and cut our copes. Our fence comes over to our pivot point, right here. Okay, once our fence locks into our pivot, all we do is take our straight edge on that bearing, bring our fence up, lock it down, and we're ready to cut. Now, we're going to go get our push block, and I'll show you why we're going to use a push block rather than a miter gauge. Okay, here's our push block that we're going to run our copes through with. And a lot of guys use a miter gauge. If you use a miter gauge, you're going to get that perfectly square with your fence. And our fence, you know, it pivots. It's not always parallel, but I think this works better than a miter gauge because it allows me to get in there tight, and it also acts as a backer, so we don't get any chip out. So, and plus it keeps the board square, just like a miter gauge. So we'll come into here, and our edge of our board is going to make contact with that bearing, and we're going to make our cope cuts, right like this. Okay, and there's our cope cuts, and you can see we're not getting any chipping going on the back here because we're following right behind with that backer. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to change bits. The next bit is designed to go with the grain. So we can turn those two and our stiles can join in, and we're going to go with the grain and cut the pattern cut next. What's nice about all of our sets, all of our box sets right here is this. Once you have that first bit set to the correct height, you don't have to mess with the height. What we have in the bottom is our rubber grommet, okay? We have a little rubber grommet in the bottom. When I drop this in now, when I tighten it, it'll compress against that rubber grommet. And you're not supposed to bottom a bit out, you know, but this rubber grommet allows you, when you tighten it, to compress against that grommet. So using a rubber grommet works great. All right, so we're going to come into here, lock it up, and we're ready to go. Take our ring, and again, we're going to take and put our fence flush with the bearing. The bearing's on the top here now. Just pivot our fence. That's what I like about a pivoting fence. Lock it down, we're ready to cut. Now, I need a push block. I need a push block to come into here now, put this piece down, and run them through. And what we're doing, we're always putting the good side down, okay? So we're going to get our push block, put on top of our stock, and run our stiles and rails through. Okay, I'm going to stop here before I do the last cut just to show you that when we change those bits, they're perfectly matched, perfectly set, because when I make this cut, that top cutter should be getting rid of part of that tenon. You can see how it just perfectly comes out. You can see where I'm lined up. Watch when this is cut here now. Sometimes you may have a little bit of fuzz on the bottom or the top here. And if you do, that means your bits may be up a 64th or really a small fraction, or down a small fraction. But we've got a perfect fit this time. So right here, our stiles and rails are going to go together. And you can see, perfectly flush, top and bottom. Okay. Okay, there's the stiles and rails for our shaker door. Now, the first shaker door we're going to make is going to be very simple. All we're going to do is put a piece of plywood in there. And since we're using quarter sawn oak here, we're going to pick out a quarter sawn piece of plywood. And how are we going to figure out the size of this? Right here. Remember, this piece is 8 inches. Okay? So we're going to make this, we could make this 8 inches also because it's the same width as this, but plywood doesn't expand. But I always like to cut a 1/16 of an inch shy. Same thing up and down. If this is 20 inches, all we got to do is subtract 4 and 4 inches. 2 and 2, 20 minus 4 is 16. So let's make it 16, just back it off a 1/16. Now, most plywood nowadays, when you buy it, is undersized plywood. A 1/4 inch piece of plywood doesn't measure 1/4 inch. It's usually right around 7/32. That's why this shaker set of ours is designed not to cut your typical 1/4 inch groove in here. It only cuts a 7/32 inch groove. That way, when your plywood goes into here now, it's not going to rattle like a lot of sets will. Okay? So we're going to come into here and stick our plywood into here. Okay, our panel goes in. We're gonna glue up our. When you glue this up, you know, you put a little bit of glue here, glue here, glue here. Don't get it too close to the edge where it comes out that inside edge. Okay. Same thing on this side, the bottom rail. And then our other stile. And all we do there is just stick it in our clamps, and you can see how very quickly you can build a nice flat panel door. And this shaker look is really becoming popular right now. Okay, that's one way you can do it, is make a flat panel door using 1/4 inch plywood, which is undersized. The other thing you can do now is keep that same style and rail on the outside, but on the inside, sometimes that when you stain up that plywood, it doesn't match the hardwood exactly. So what we're going to do, instead of using plywood here, we're going to use a piece of hardwood, and that hardwood, what we're going to do is plane it down to about 5/8, and we're going to use the panel cutter on it, but we're still going to have it look like a flat panel. I'll show you how we do that next. Okay, we took that piece of plywood out of here, that flat panel, that plywood, and we have a piece of actual hardwood here instead, you know, and you can mill it down to 1/2 inch, 5/8, anywhere in between there. Just don't make it 3/4, it's easier to machine. And you want to have as much reveal in the back, you'll see here in a little bit. And the reason you might want to do this, you might have a hard time finding some particular plywoods. If you have some exotic woods, or if you have some quarter sawn, well then just use some hardwood, you know, and it matches a lot better, and it's going to end up looking a lot nicer. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that pattern cut out, and we're going to take, that's the last bit we used, and we're going to put the panel cutter in. Okay? The panel cutter has a back cutter and a front cutter. What I mean by that, it's going to be cutting the back and the front of this panel at the same time. Okay? Well, what we're going to do, we're not concerned with the front of the panel, which is this right here. This here usually cuts the front. Well, the front of our panel is going to be up this time, and I'll show you what we're doing. What I'm going to do is, first of all, lock this panel cutter in. And what I want to do is set that cutter so that the back cutter is just barely skimming on the front of this. This is the front of my door because it's flat, okay? So what I'm going to do is come down here and adjust that right like this. Up. We're going to tweak that up. Right there. We're pretty close. We'll see what happens. You can test cut it on a piece of scrap wood. We're going to change inserts here because we're using a bigger panel cutter. Okay, get our stile and rail out of here. Fence drops into our pivot. Straight edge on the bearing. Since we're not taking much stock here this time, I think we can take the whole cut at once. Okay, and we're going to put, this is the good side, okay, well we're going to leave it up, okay. This is one of the few times we do that too. And we're going to slow the speed. Of our router down because we're using a larger panel cutter. I'm going to stop right there, and I think you can barely see my back cutters hitting. So what it does, it knows, see, I'm fitting it perfect. I got it just sitting perfect. And you can see now, this normally would be the front of my raised panel door, but we're putting it to the back. Now, this is our flat panel to the front. So let's continue cutting the other 3 sides. In grain, with the grain, in grain, with the grain. In that order. Okay, right there is our panel. Now, when we made this panel, we had to make that panel 1/4 of an inch narrower. Because we're using back to hardwood. What's hardwood going to do? It's going to move on you. Wood never dies. It keeps living, expanding, contracting. So, when we made this panel, if this rail is 8 inches, we're going to make this 7 3/4. And if our opening right here is 20 inches, our outside is 20, minus that 4, gives us 16. Well, we're going to go 15 3/4. Okay, all that's covered inside in our instructions. All right, so we're going to stick this in together now. When we do that, we want to use the panel line strips, okay? And the rubber panel line strips are little rubber strips like this. Okay, we're going to stick our panel line strips in our stiles here. 2 of them in each stile. I always use a pencil to poke them in with. It works very well. And some people don't put them in the top and the bottom because wood cannot expand that way, but I always do because I like to have that panel cut narrower so I got the same reveal on all 4 sides. The panel looks the same on all 4 sides. Okay, now we're ready to stick that panel in there. And this is the back side, remember. Now, if you want to see how I got a little bit of a lip here, if you don't want that lip showing on the back of your door, you can take and plane that down more yet. But we're going to put this as the front of our panel. The flat part is the front of our door. Okay. There, once you got everything lined up, front and bottom, right there is your door. So we're going to stick that in our clamps and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, we've got it in our clamps, secured in our clamps, and you can see it makes a beautiful shaker door with that flat look there, and we're nice and flush there. And like I said earlier, if you want to get rid of this in the back here, just run that planer through, run that a little bit thinner. Instead of making it 5/8, go down to a true 1/2 inch. Or you can even go to 3/8 if you want. So that's the second type of door you can make with this shaker system. Now, the third door we're going to make is a true raised panel door with this hardwood, but we'll have this piece here flipped around showing in the front. We'll show you how we do that next. Okay, here's our raised panel, same size as our other panel. But remember, we're going to keep it the same thickness as this is our regular stiles and rails we've used for all 3 doors. The same thickness as our stiles and rails. But we have to move that panel cutter to match. We want the tongue on this cutter to correspond with the bearing, and that's kind of hard to do. So we'll go back to our easy set that we used earlier. We'll come into the 3/4, and here's our panel cut. We'll line that up, and you can see I got to lower that bit down just a hair. Just a hair to... right there. We should be setting pretty close. Okay? Lock that in. And we're ready to start cutting the true raised panel. Now, this raised panel cutter, remember, our grooves are not 1/4 of an inch. They're 7/16. Well, this raised panel cutter also has a 7/16 inch spacing between the back cutter and the front cutter, so we're not getting a true 1/4 inch here, we're getting 7/16. So we're going to come into here, flush with our bearing, but since we're making a full cut now, we're going to come out here and take it in 2 passes. The good side is always down, and again, in grain, with the grain, in grain, with the grain. And if you're just starting to make raised panel doors, you can see how easy that was. if you don't want to take 2 passes, you can move this back and inch it, take 3 or 4 passes, and just take small baby cuts if you want. You don't have to hog out that much each time. It's just at the final time, you're going to be flush with the bearing. Right there is my raised panel. Gives you a little 22.5-degree bevel. Now, what we have to do, just like we did previously, we put our panel line strips into there and glue up our stiles and rails the same way. And this is the same size as our smaller piece because it has to expand and contract. We're going to glue this up now. I'm going to take this out, glue it up, and put it in my clamps. And when we come back, I'll show you how we're going to dress up the outside edge of our door. Okay, we've got our door out of the clamps. It's all glued up now. And what's nice about our sets now is the stiles and the rails and the panel, all 5 pieces are all flush on the front, and all 5 pieces are flush on the back. Now you can take a random orbital sander so you can sand all 5 pieces at once. That's how it should be done. Now, what we're going to do next is we want to put a detailed edge around the outside of the shaker door. Some people just like to leave it square. Well, I like to put a little chamfered edge in there. So, to put a chamfered edge in there, we're going to eliminate this panel cutter, and we've got a little chamfer bit, a 45-degree chamfer bit we're going to use. I like this look a lot. I'll show you what it looks like here. Take that bit, stick it into our router, snug it up. Put our ring into here. Now, we don't want to chamfer it the entire way. We just want to bevel it just a little bit. So, see if I can give you a look right here. What we're going to do is just chamfer that thing. I'm touching the bearing. I'm pretty good right there. I'm going to leave it right there. I like it right where we had the panel cutter. Okay. Lock it down. The bearing goes onto my fence flush, and we're going to make the 4 cuts for our detailed edge on the outside. Since we have a smaller bit in there, we can turn the speed up a little bit. Right there, it gives you a little